Welcome to Designing Systematic Reviews. By the end of this session, you'll know the 5 tests every research question must pass, the 4 building blocks of a clinical question, and the 3 levels of PICO that often get confused. We'll also cover scope, equity, and intervention theory, everything you need to settle before searching. This is the most important hour you'll spend on your review. Let's begin. Here's the roadmap. We'll start with why the question matters and look at what intervention reviews can actually do. Next, PICO and its 3 levels. Then scope decisions, broad versus narrow, and lumping versus splitting. After that, how to make sure you're asking the right question, including equity. Finally, practical tools, logic models, and frameworks like Tidyr. The question is not just step 1. It determines every downstream decision, eligibility, search strategy, data extraction, synthesis, even your conclusions all trace back to it. Teams that rush this often pay for it later by quietly rewriting the question after they've seen the studies, which is a form of bias. 2 things often get overlooked. First, strong questions are shaped through dialogue with experts and end users, not drafted in isolation. Second, questions aren't neutral. How you frame them reflects assumptions about who matters. Build equity in from the start and not as an afterthought. So how do you know if a question is solid enough to build a review on? Finer. 5 tests. Feasible. Can your team actually do this with the available studies and resources? Interesting. To you. Reviews take many months. If you don't care, you'll burn out at screening. Novel. Check the registries. Don't duplicate work that already exists. Ethical. Including equity, opportunity, cost, and who actually benefits. Relevant. Will the answer change practice or policy? Pro tip. Apply finer twice. Once when you draft the question and again after the inevitable refinement once you have scoped the literature. Before structuring the questions with PICO, let's widen the lens. A systematic review isn't only does X work better than Y. There are at least 4 aims worth knowing. 1. The classic single intervention versus a defined comparator. 2. Network meta-analysis. Comparing many treatments at once. Increasingly important since real decisions involve choice. 3. Effect modifiers. How effects vary by population, setting, or dose. This shifts the review from what works to what works for whom. 4. Economic context. Costs and cost effectiveness. Plan from day 1. You can layer these aims into one review, but only with upfront planning. The minute you go ambitious, somebody will trot out the apples and oranges critique. So take a beat with this one. Gene Glass, who basically invented meta-analysis, had a comeback. Comparing apples to apples is trivial. Real science compares apples to oranges. Sometimes the broader, messier comparison is the more useful one, because clinicians and policymakers are choosing between very different things. Don't be embarrassed by heterogeneity. Investigate it. The code gives you permission to be ambitious, provided you have structure to manage the complexity. That structure is PICO. PICO. 4 building blocks. You should be able to recite this from memory by the end of this video. P. Population. Be specific. Patients with diabetes isn't enough. Stage, severity, age, and setting all matter. I. Intervention. Describe in enough detail that another team could replicate it. Vague descriptions are the single biggest cause of unreplicable reviews. C. Comparator. Usual care, placebo, and active alternative. The answer changes which studies are eligible. O. Outcome. Both benefits and harms, and patient-reported outcomes like mortality, quality of life, and function, not just lab values. PICO looks deceptively simple. It isn't. It operates on 3 levels, and this is where most reviewers get tripped up. First, the review PICO, the broad scope of what's in or out. Set in your protocol. Second, the synthesis PICO, the PICO of each specific comparison you plan. Also set in the protocol before screening. Third, the studies PICO, what the included studies actually investigated. Real studies rarely match your plans perfectly. The gap between synthesis PICO and studies PICO is called indirectness. Document and discuss it. Most review failures come from mixing these 3 levels. Once you understand PICO operates on 3 levels, the big strategic question is, how broad should the reviewer PICO be? Broad reviews give a comprehensive picture across populations and settings. Network meta-analyses live here. The downside: more studies, more heterogeneity, harder to interpret if effects vary in ways you can't explain. Narrow reviews are easier and faster, but you risk too few studies, even an NT review, and you can't examine variation across populations. Neither is right or wrong. The choice depends on what stakeholders need and what literature exists. Decide deliberately and document why. Now, critical point. Broad versus narrow is one decision. Lumping versus splitting is a different one, and people muddle them constantly. Scope decisions what's eligible to be in the review. Lumping versus splitting decides how those eligible studies are grouped within the analysis. Lumping combines studies in one analysis to ask the broader question and lets you investigate why effects vary. Splitting keeps comparisons separate to ask narrower questions. Cleaner estimates, easier for clinicians to act on. Which is right depends on the audience. Choosing between two specific drugs, split. Funding, a category of interventions, lump. The clean way to have both, network meta-analysis. We have spent time on how to frame and structure questions. None of it matters if you're framing the wrong question. Two complementary routes for ensuring relevance. First, priority setting exercises. Formal processes where stakeholders decide which uncertainties matter most. Check whether priority setting work already exists in your topic area. Second, stakeholder engagement. Patients, carers, clinicians, policymakers, anyone affected. Ideally ongoing throughout the review. If resources are tight, even a one-off engagement helps. Reviews that skip this often answer questions nobody asked. There's literature suggesting 85% of biomedical research is wasted. Don't be a contributor. Stakeholders raise the relevance question. Equity raises a sharper one. Who's being left out by how the question is framed? Progress Plus is the framework. Place, where people live, plus race, ethnicity, language, culture. Class, education, occupation, income, social capital. Identity, gender, religion, sexual orientation. Plus, age, disability, and any other relevant characteristic. The point isn't to analyze every category in every review. That would be paralyzing. The point is to think systematically about who might be left behind and plan upfront how you'll address it. Take 10 minutes with your team and ask, who's missing? Logic models ask a different question than equity. How is the intervention supposed to work in the first place? A logic model is a graphical sketch of the theory of change, intervention components, mechanisms, proximal outputs, distal outcomes. Two flavors, system-based, context, geography, politics, and process-oriented, the causal pathway and effect modifiers. They often overlap. Why bother? It refines your question, justifies subgroup analysis upfront rather than post hoc, surfaces in unintended harms, and lets you distinguish theory failure from implementation failure. Very different conclusions. A logic model gives the big picture theory. To operationalize it, you need more granular tools. Quick tour, treat this as a reference. Taxonomies, hierarchical structures for categorizing interventions, outcomes, or populations. Useful when you need a defensible way to lump or split. Tidier, template for intervention, description, and replication. A 12-item checklist. Use it to structure your data extraction so you capture what was actually done. ICAT SR, for assessing complexity, particularly relevant for multi-component public health interventions. Core outcome set, agreed minimum set of outcomes for a given condition. Using one makes your review comparable to others in this area. Everything so far is protocol stage planning, but protocols meet reality. 3 things to plan for upfront. First, your question will probably change as understanding deepens. That's normal. Document any change in your methods. The line you don't cross is performing data-driven changes after seeing which studies are favorable. That's bias. Retest any refinement against finer. Second, sparse data contingencies. If studies are scarce, plan how you'll broaden. Say, any antioxidant instead of vitamin C. Specify in the protocol so it's clearly not post hoc. Third, economic data. Plan to extract costs as outcomes, broken down by category. Costs in one healthcare system don't translate to another. Think internationally where you can. Let's recap. 5 things to remember. 1. The question is the foundation. Eligibility, search, and synthesis all flow from how it's framed. 2. Finer tests. PICO structures. 5 tests for any question. 4 building blocks for any structure. Memorize both. 3. PICO operates on 3 levels: review, synthesis, studies. Don't confuse them. 4. Scope and grouping are separate decisions. Broad versus narrow is scope, lumping versus splitting is how you group within the synthesis. 5. Equity and theory matter. Progress plus surfaces who's left out. Logic models surface how the intervention is supposed to work. Both belong in the protocol. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. If this was useful, like the video and subscribe. The next one in this series covers eligibility criteria, search strategy, and risk of bias assessment, where the question we just designed actually meets the literature. Drop your questions in the comments. The further reading on the screen is the academic literature behind today's content. See you in the next one.